because practice makes perfect. And although you'll never get perfect in managing this stress, because it's real, and part of stress management is about accepting what's real and important. And we can't always be, the perfect stress-free person, but we can do our best to modulate it enough to get some balance. So that's where I hope to head. Just by way of a disclaimer, I want you to know, if I look, Joe, you probably don't know the way I have looked in the past. I wish I could see you as well. But for the last month, both my wife and I have been dealing with COVID-19. We both had what probably is a mild case, because neither one had to go to the hospital. And so we're pretty much through it for the most part. And we weren't able to get tested, so I can't say for sure that it's COVID-19, but my wife being a kind of nurse educator, we're both pretty convinced that we have had it. And the good news to that is that hopefully we have the antibodies, and maybe we'll have the immunity so we can go forward. And but nevertheless, so I've just been a month of being sick, so I'm hoping to that you don't really know that other than my telling you. So I'm going to take you through a few slides, and hopefully these slides will give you some info in addition to what I'm talking about. So what I'm trying to achieve today, and what I hope that you'll get out of this, is, as I said earlier, if you look at the top left, the strategies for you in the workforce. Underneath that, the emotional healing that you can begin now. You don't have to wait until this is over to begin emotional healing. Management of emotions is a part of this. On the top right box, you see the understanding the impact of critical stress, and that to me is more important than all of it, because through the understanding of how critical stress, I'm not talking about everyday stress, but critical stress, and some people call it critical incident stress, and it could even lead to, and if you listen to what's going on TV, they're talking about this is causing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's not much of a difference between critical incident stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, other than the length of time that it hits. PTSD is kind of more permanent and long-lasting, versus critical incident stress that usually lasts about a month. But the symptoms are very similar. And the bottom line is there will be some control in your life. And I hope that you, once you understand how critical incident stress impacts you, that you can start to, employ some techniques to manage control. As I started to say earlier, the difference in this stress is this is real, it's big, it's changing every day, it's affecting everybody. It's hitting all the time, and it's hitting you too. A lot of the times when I've worked in situations, we seem to be talking about other people, getting hit. Whether, unless you were in New York City for 9/11, it's those folks in New York, or it's those folks in the Haitian earthquake. I remember being part of that, and but now we're all in it, and we're all being affected. So we have to make sure that we take time for ourselves, as well as the people that we're working with. The real good news here today is that stress reactions that most of us have, and that most people will have, because they're predictable, that's just the way human beings operate. If you turn the dial enough, you're going to get a set series of symptoms and reactions. And we know that we can predict that, we can make it happen, and it happens to so many people. And because we know about it, we also know that the techniques of stress management can also manage it. And so that's what we hope to do today. There are three big things that you need to do in order to make that happen. The first one is we've got to move ourselves along the stages of acceptance. We've been dragging along, and I'm going to show you a slide in a minute with the stages of acceptance in terms of, you may remember them from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and, the grief and the bargaining. Well, we got to move quicker than we've been moving. And I'm going to challenge you to just think about, you can move slow along that. You can be stuck in grief and anger and bargaining, but why not think about a strategy to move yourself all the way to acceptance? Like, let's move on with it. Why go through the pains of all the stages? Because you're going to have to get to acceptance anyway at some point. So why not get to it as sooner rather than later? And if you understand how to move through the stages, you will get there faster than hopefully some random occurrence will something will happen and move you along. So let's take a proactive position and move ourselves along the stage and get to acceptance. The other thing you need to do, which is number 2 on this slide, is let's think about how do you incorporate more productive and healthier feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And I'm going to separate today, and I want you to think about the fact that as a human being, your 3 major constructs in your mind, in your brain, the way you think is one of them. Those are your thoughts, and your feelings are another whole set. So you feel certain ways, you think certain ways, and then you act certain ways. And what I'm going to suggest today and hope that you get out of this is that if we learn to move our feelings and change our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, all 3 of these things, not just one, but if we learn to change all of them, we're really going to be in better shape than if we just tackle our feelings or thoughts. Some of you I know have more thoughts than feelings. Some of you only have thoughts. They say men have more thoughts than feelings, and that, people make jokes about women being more feeling based than men. And so, but we all have all 3. So we're going to take a look and figure out what we may be feeling, thinking, and behaving during times of acute stress, and what additional things we might do right now to alter all 3. And that will reduce and mitigate the impact of stress in your mind and body, and by just changing those 3 systems. So it's kind of instead of calling just an electrician in, you're going to call an electrician and a plumber and a roofer in to fix your house, all 3, because your whole house gets affected. Okay? So this is what we talked about, returning to stages of acceptance. This is, some of you kind of know the grief cycle. Starts with shock and denial, and it moves through anger and depression, and all the way to bargaining and acceptance, and finally, your meaningful life. And rather than get stuck in stages, and if you look at this, you might even identify where you are in any of these moments in time. We know that shock and denial took place in this country for maybe too long, and people, we didn't take action soon enough, and that's one thing that happens with shock and denial. We know that people need to hear things 7, 8, 9, 10 times before they take action due to denial and shock. So we're going to move through this. I see a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people who are stuck in anger, and some people who are caught in depression. Of course, if somebody in your life is sick and not doing well, you're going to be upset and depressed and go through every stage. But for a lot of it, we get stuck and we don't have to be there. So we're going to move along and get to this acceptance as quickly as possible. So how are we going to do it? This is kind of where we're at now. If you look at maybe where we're at now, people in the denial stage, they're still going out. I think I see the videos of the beaches in Florida, they're hanging out, they're not using precautions, and then a lot of people who are just mad, and then and all the way down to the grief, the loss. Think about the losses in your life, the losses in your way of life. And that's kind of where people get stuck. So if you find yourself in one of these, if you start to look and say, where are you in this cycle? Maybe it's time to be aware of it. And it's through awareness of that that will help lead you forward and lead you on. And again, if you have questions or comments along the way, please let me know. I'm not trying to be kind of robotic about this, and I'm not trying to minimize the impact of your grief or your anger or even your denial. But the more you become conscious of these stages and where you're at in that, being aware is power. And without awareness of where we're at, we have no way of changing it. We just get stuck and go round and around. So, got to get to acceptance, going to get through it. And I'm going to move to the next slide. So think about for a minute, if you would, what does it mean to be in acceptance? If you could move all the way forward and get beyond the denial and bargaining and anger, who would you be and how would you be? And in those 3 areas I mentioned, thinking and feeling and behaviors, how would you be different? if you were already at acceptance. Almost as if you could write the story. If you were to author a short story of you getting to acceptance magically, how would you think, how would you feel, and how would you behave? So let's take a look at the next slide. You know, I pulled this out at the recommendation of a friend of mine because if we know what we can change and gets back to the wisdom to know the difference, the things we can change and accept the things we can't, all of that. That serenity prayer is really important in this exercise into know what you need to accept, because acceptance is going to be the key in accepting acceptance. Okay. Um, One thing that gets in the way is your body's reaction to stress. And this is the enemy that's going to get in the way, because stress, because of all these things that happen, and we're going to talk more about this as time goes on, but of all these things that happen, it gets in the way of our ability to manage our thoughts and feelings and behavior. We get stuck. It's like stress becomes a rust for our brain. This cortisol flows into our brain, and we feel rusted and stuck, and it gets in the way of our fluidity to move along in different stages and through different events. So let's take a look at, remember we talked just a few moments ago about behaviors, feelings, and thoughts. These are typical behaviors, feelings, and thoughts of people who are stressed. So take a look at this for a minute and think about yourself. Think about your behaviors, what you may be likely to do. And if you have a pen or pencil handy, if you're writing or you're taking notes, think about what behaviors you may be involved in that aren't serving you right now. And one of them that's not on here, but it's on a later slide, is the behavior of watching endless news cycles. And that is a behavior that and it becomes a habit and almost a need that needs to be broken. And we've taught this over the years that you got to, watch a news cycle and then take a break and leave it alone for hours if you can, because the constancy of the news cycle is a problem, and it keeps the physical reactions on the left side. It keeps that going, and it makes it harder for you to finally break through and change and feel better when it's time. So add to your behaviors the making sure that you stay true to, maybe watching the news every once a day or twice a day or 3 times a day. But the constancy of the news cycle is not good for you. And this has been known for years that it's a driver during times of crisis. So feelings, you're going to have to start identifying your feelings and think about the people that you're working with, the people that you're responsible for and with, your coworkers, and what they might be feeling. And once these feelings begin, the stress reaction, the chemical flow heightens these feelings and makes these feelings seem not only more real, but harder to get rid of, because the chemicals and the adrenaline just keep them flowing. And the same is true with the thoughts. So ask yourself, what thoughts are you likely to be thinking on a more regular basis? And thoughts also come in terms of nightmares, and it also comes in terms of being confused or ambivalent and forgetful, as well as being obsessed and, whatever you may be thinking. So you're going to have to take a note and think about, well, what thoughts are you having on a regular basis? Are they thoughts of dying? Are they worries? I have a mother who's in an assisted living care facility now, and, the thoughts of, and the ventilator thoughts, all those thoughts are very scary, and we tend to get locked in on them, and it seems like we must have them. So our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can get out of line, actually, to the reality of how we really want to be. And the question you have to ask yourself, are they serving you? And are they serving your family? Are they serving your co-workers? And do you want to be the best you possible? And if so, what can you do to start changing these, to recognize them, cross them out? What would you like to feel and think instead? Because we're going to spend a lot of time on how to do that. I'm not just going to talk about it. It's really going to be, how do you do it? Otherwise, you're going to get frustrated. So here's should I call it the new you? This is kind of a same grid with, I just selected some new thoughts, feelings, behaviors physical reactions that you might be able to incorporate. But only you know which ones are right for you and work for you. So let's take a look at any one of them. Let's look at your behaviors for a minute. Are you engaging with others as much, and engaging in relaxation techniques? There's lots of good stuff available online, yoga and meditation training, self-hypnosis, things that will help with a lot of people are using Zoom with family and friend activities right now. What about nurturing your own spirituality and, connecting with your spirituality in this time? Um, Making an opportunity to engage behaviorally in healthy eating. These changes in behavior will be critical to pick and select and make sure that you use this as an opportunity to start finding some new behaviors that work. And as that happens, what new feelings do you want to start having in your life that allow you to coordinate and kind of collaborate with your new behaviors? Are they feelings of acceptance, like we talked about earlier, getting to that acceptance and what that might mean? How about your confidence, your sadness, your grief? What about your guilt? Feelings that have to do with family members. How can you change that and begin to incorporate? What are the new ones you want to have? Feelings of empathy, feelings of giving, connectedness. So you're going to if you can start to list for yourself some new feelings, some new behaviors, and what about your thoughts? It's a whole separate world, what you think. How do you want to be thinking? And what kind of thoughts do you want to have? Because you notice that empathy is twice. I've got empathy in the bottom of feelings and the bottom of thoughts. So it's not like empathy is just the feeling of wanting to be empathic to other people and feel for other people, but sometimes the way you think, and allowing yourself to think in an empathic way, and to start to ask yourself if you want to do that and can do that. Do you want to be more informed and more decisive in your thinking? If so, what are those thoughts? Because if you don't have that list, or at least start the list, then you won't be able to move forward, which is how do you make sure that these things become a part of you? And that's the next step, because it's kind of close to what we do in sports psychology. Kelly mentioned in my introduction my work with athletes. And, as much as athletes try to think the right thing and feel the right thing and behave properly when they're in the midst of, hitting a golf ball or a tennis ball or in baseball at the plate, your body and your brain, your feelings and thoughts don't always cooperate. And in my private practice, back when I was, before my retirement, I'm out of retirement, as you can see, but when I was in my clinical practice and I was working with an athlete, whether it be an Olympic athlete, a professional athlete, usually one of the three of these things was off. The behavior was off, which would be maybe like keeping your head down in golf. The feeling was off, or the thought was off. Golfers have too many swing thoughts. So think about what thoughts you want to have right now in this. How do you want to handle it? Even thoughts about managing hard conversations with employees about, benefits or, finances and the things you have to deal with. How do you really want to think when you're in conversations with these folks? So you want to start to put in some new ideas, new thoughts, and new feelings. I took this off the TV. I took this photo from my TV the other day of Governor Cuomo. And he was starting to move people toward, acceptance by saying that, this will be over. And here's why, and here's some new things to think about why it will be over, and to start to think about how give people confidence in how they feel and think. And so this was really an interesting, I thought, and brave attempt of Governor Cuomo to start to bring people to a sense of normalcy again, and to the future of acceptance, and to reduce some of the stress. So let's see what, I think I got a couple of slides of Governor Cuomo, but so this is how we're going to integrate new feelings, new thoughts, and new behaviors, okay? Now, we're going to go through this a couple of times, but step one is, as we've been talking, is we have to identify the new thoughts and the new feelings and the new behaviors. Somehow, We've got to put them into a vision. We have to, if you believe in the sense of feeling the totality of it, if you believe in a visualization that's strong enough so that you feel it, um, how do you take a new feeling, whether it be empathy or a way to think, and how do you see yourself in the future having that or being that way, even tomorrow or later tonight? Can you see yourself, for example, okay, you turned off the TV, you're not watching the news. What are you doing? And can you see yourself doing it as a positive behavior? Step two, if you want your mind and body to accept it, um, you want to exaggerate your experience that you're trying to integrate. You want to make it real. So for me, if the idea is, okay, I'm going to turn off the TV. I live in the East Coast. I've got enough light after the evening news, 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock. I'm going to go outside and I'm going to look at the water and or do some gardening. But how do I want to feel and how do I want to think when I'm gardening? I want to think that I'm connected to my gardening. I want to think about, uh, the weeding that I'm doing and what it means to be, at kind of part of the be with the soil and be with that. And I want to feel connected, like as if for a moment that there is no pandemic going on. And the key behind step two is if I can lie to myself for a minute and pretend that I'm out in the garden and that I'm connected to the world and provide the emotion. So you get the feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. If the emotion can be one of being satisfied, if I can exaggerate it, just the way things get exaggerated in movies, the way they get exaggerated in TV, the way they get exaggerated all over, that in stories, if you can, in novels, if you can exaggerate the feeling that you would like to have and make it feel real to the point where you almost feel like it's an experience. In reality, it's your imagination, it's your mind, you're making it up. But if you can picture yourself 3 hours from now being somewhere, maybe talking to your kids, maybe being around the house with them, enjoying their noise, enjoying the sound of a tricycle rumbling through the living room, that kind of thing. If you can lie to yourself and say that the sound of your child with its trike on your hardwood floors is making you happy, can you exaggerate that? No, I know I've said this twice already, but I want you to try it out. Maybe not at this moment, but when we finish the webinar, if you can stop long enough to feel it and exaggerate the feeling, think it, see it as if it's really happening. Because only through an exaggerated response can you plant the seed and make it possible that it can occur. Okay? So you want to exaggerate it like it's real. You want to make it, feel it, think it, experience it, exaggerate it until it feels real. And then after you've done all that, at the peak, at the moment, this is a technique, but at the moment when you feel it at its peak, at its maximum, you want to use the following words that's in step three. You want to say to yourself, simple words, it's true. You want to say that to yourself. You can say it out loud if you want. But if you say it at the moment when you're feeling it, thinking it, imagining it, creating the internal process of the thoughts and feelings you want to have, having exaggerated it, tell yourself it's true. So the example I just gave, you're sitting at your kitchen table and there comes your kids in the indoor trikes with the plastic wheels and they're scuffing up your hardwood floors and making noise. And you're there saying to yourself, oh, how nice to hear the sound of children. So you're lying to yourself, right? Because it's like a loud noise. And you're accepting it. And you're telling yourself it's true, that your kids are safe, or that you're safe and your family's safe for the moment. And it's true. And you experience it as something that's exaggerated. So could that be joyful? Could it be loving? It's real and it's a part of your life at that moment. The more that you exaggerate it and tell yourself that it's true, the greater the odds are that it will be true when the time comes for it. And this is an exercise you should do. I would do it 10 times a day. If you pick the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that you want to have, no matter what they are, um, make it real and tell yourself it's true. We can go back over this and with 100 different examples. I'm happy to take your questions, but let's move to the next slide. I got this the other day from my friend Mary Beth Gray, who some of you may know, and she sent me this as a way of changing perspective, um, uh, getting back to acceptance and giving yourself some things to think and feel that could be true. This is a quote Mary Beth sent me from Dr. Lindsay Jernigan, and it's instead of seeing social distancing and travel bans as panic, try seeing them as acts of mass cooperation intended to protect the collective whole. This plan is not about individuals going into hiding. It's a global deep breath, an agreement between humans around the planet to be still, in hopes that the biggest wave can pass without engulfing too many of the vulnerable amongst us. So think about this as an act of mass cooperation intended to protect the collaborative whole or the collective whole. I would like to exaggerate that for me and to think it and to feel it more. And this quote kind of puts me closer to the whole acceptance conversation. Allows me to think, this is something we all could be doing. It's kind of Zen-like and big and important. And so, Mary Beth, thank you for that and that information. Um, Now, there are all the tried and true ways of managing stress that if you look at that colorful wheel around stress management, um, these things still work. And these things are still good because these are the kind of things that help reduce that chemical flow, that toxic chemical flow of cortisol. And these things allow your mind to loosen up enough to let these smaller techniques work. Exercise, is wonderful. Being involved in your hobbies. I'm not going to go through them all. You'll have these slides available, once this is over. But take time and think about the things in your life that you want to be doing and you want to be incorporating, because the more you can incorporate this, the better off you'll be. Um, finding things in nature, all of this are pieces of stress management. And the more you do these things, the easier it is to change the way you think and feel. Okay? So I'm going to move to the next slide. Now, I said earlier we're going to dig a little bit into understanding critical incident stress, kind of stepbrother of PTSD, because the more you know about it, the more you know how to help the people you're working with as well as yourself, how to understand if people are suddenly cranky all of a sudden, if your husband, wife, kids, if people start getting, they're not listening, they're forgetful, um, uh, they don't remember things, or they're not seeing the things, you look at show them something and they act like they haven't seen it before. These are all signs of critical incident stress. So let's try to understand it, because then we're going to take a look at what are the major ways of managing it. And I don't want to say cure, but managing it enough so that you can not let it get in the way of your life balance. Governor Cuomo did a piece on the same day I showed you the earlier slide about cabin fever, and talked about it being is bad for a lot of people as the coronavirus as it is, excuse me, as it is physically. And some of the things that he listed, the big things the New Yorkers were experiencing were the isolation. Um, Now, the feeling of isolation, we have to remember how, of all ways to get people into a stress response, to get people hallucinating, is to deprive them of stimuli. It doesn't take long for people who are in the hospital, for example, to start hallucinating if they're really isolated and without any stimulation. And so many of us depend upon human contact and human relationships and going to work and being with people and having real communication that this feeling of isolation was enough that Governor Cuomo started to worry about it and the mood swings that it caused and the anger that it causes and resentment of other people and the irrational outbursts and the anger. So we have to expect it when we're isolated. So I'm going to suggest that we try to not isolate ourselves too much from the world around us because it is one of the main causes of critical incident stress. Um, when we're isolated, we tend to get inside our head too much. And who do we listen to when we're inside our head? We listen to our own thoughts and our own feelings and our own reactions to things. And listening to ourselves seems real and can seem reasonable and rational, but you end up getting the same answers all the time, and you don't always get the solutions that you may need. Even if you don't agree with other people's perspectives, at least other perspectives get you out of the stress response that is caused by being isolated. Okay. Um, so if you take and compile the social isolation stress, feelings that you get from the social isolation, and you add that to the financial fears that you may be having and people around you may be having, the dislodging of the kind of sense of well-being and confidence people have, any one of these things is enough. But in this particular category, we have something additional. We have this inability to grasp the truth. When you watch the news, if you do, you start to see that the truth changes quite a bit. And depending on who you listen to or what you read, facts seem to be changing a lot. And even, I'm not even talking about the people who are trying to bend the truth for whatever motivation or reason. I'm talking about the fact that facts change. And facts are changing very quickly about the coronavirus. And things about it are changing. And 1 minute you're 6 feet from people, then you read maybe that it's really 40 feet, and that people had to cough in order for the virus to spread, and then you learn that they don't have to cough, they maybe just breathe, and that's enough. And then you learn that certain masks work, and then certain masks don't work. It's like things change quickly, so it's hard to trust because we end up losing our confidence in our usually reliable sources. And the reliable sources can be medical people, they can be news people, they can be political people, they can be your neighbors and friends. We end up losing confidence in our reliable sources. And it is for that reason that if you are responsible for a population of people and the information that gets communicated to that population, you want to be as reliable with information as possible and to try your best to be as truthful and as factual as possible with the populations that you're working with, because it only will make their stress worse if they lose trust in you. And that is very important. Um, the additional stress is the grief that will be present no matter what stage we're at as we lose our life, our work life, and our friends and our people who may be sick and die, and our support systems. So that's going to come and go, making it harder to sift through all of this to really accurately assess the facts and the truth and information. So it's incumbent upon you to become as honest and truthful and reliable as possible. Hence, this is an opinion, but one of the reasons I think Governor Cuomo has been doing a really fine job is his ability to be believable and credible with his information. Okay, so not everybody's going to be affected the same as the critical incident stress. That's what CIS is. Critical incident stress affects us. Your employees at the work site and you yourself will all be affected differently. And there will be people who will feel that they're not affected at all. And it may be true. Some people may have minimal effect from this. But these are the major things that control how you're impacted by this level of stress. One is your perception of the events, how you perceive them, um, how vulnerable you are and have been. And it is true that people who have had mental issues, obsessive compulsive disease, depression, critical incident stress, PTSD, what we call kind of mental health diagnoses in some ways, some folks will be more vulnerable to an exacerbation of your own illness. So it's important if you're on meds to keep taking them and to eat healthy and do what you can do from a mental health perspective, because you could be more vulnerable, even if the situation is different from the situations that cause the early stress or depression or OCD or ADHD. Um, the last thing is, the last two things, control of the situation is critical. We're going to talk more about that. The perception of control is the ace when it comes to whether or not somebody might have critical incident stress or even PTSD. Being in a situation that you cannot control, and if you think about it, you spend most of your life trying to control your life. You get in a job, you get in a situation, and you stay there because you can control the events around you. Maybe you control your budget if you're a CFO. Maybe you can control the way you think about the numbers. Maybe you can control your changing, benefits plans. Maybe you can control employees who are having problems, and control management situations. And if you control those well, you like the job, you stay in the job, you like the feeling of being in control. We control our bodies. And when something gets out of whack with our bodies, when we're not in control of ourselves, that's when things can really get bad. And I've probably been through, I don't know, a few thousand, maybe 5,000 fatalities of people getting killed in accidents, like train accidents and things like that, and plane crashes. And when people who are at the scene, whether it's EMT workers or people who are involved in the incidents, feel the impact of heightened stress. It could be nausea, it could be throwing up, it could be panic, it could be increased heart rate, it could be severe headache, it could be a moment of shock, tremors. It's the feeling of not being able to control your body from time to time that can set off more critical incident stress and more PTSD than the event itself. Nothing is scarier to you as a human being than not being able to control the way your body is operating, especially if you're used to having control. And it's true in sports. I'm sure you've heard of the willies that people get, or people who lose their ability to strike the golf ball or make a simple throw to first base for a ball player. It gets so bad that people quit Major League Baseball over it. Losing control of your bodily function and ability to perform causes so many of the symptoms that we're going to talk about, that we've got to understand that when people lose control, they can get weird for the first time in your life. And I don't use the word weird in a light way. I use it in that people feel weird and that they can act weird, and that on average, that feeling of being upset because you've lost control of a situation for the normal person can be 30 days, easily a month of heightened stress response, meaning anxiety, depression, anger, feeling isolated, feeling despair, feeling depressed. So if you're working with people who are still upset and it's within that 30-day window, consider them normal. Consider them like part of the healthy, normal population. It's when these symptoms continue over months, we start to worry about it. Finally, the personal meaning of the incident. Sometimes incidents give us extra meaning where we bring our guilt into it, where we bring our own history into certain incidents, and we feel sometimes guilt and blame and responsibility. So if we've been in a car crash, for example, and you're in another car crash, and sometimes one begets the other. Our brain tends to connect things. So we've got to watch out for that, how people may personally be connected and the meaning that they have of the incident. So you may want to sometimes ask yourself what all this means to your thinking and to your feelings. But the big one here really is control, perception of control. And if you were to link all of these four things together, um, you'd be vulnerable if you perceived that you weren't in control of the situation because your body gave out. Usually it's a physical reaction. Sometimes it's a pure psychological reaction where you feel total despair. Often people will believe in a moment's time that for example, that God can't exist, that there can't be a God, because if there was a God, how could they let this happen to this person or my friend or my mother? And if if when people start to think that, and they for a moment in time in a stressful way believe that, for example, that there is no God after that person said all their life, faith and belief, that is a situation that can scare them to a lot of vulnerability, and that can last for a long time. So we have to be aware of that as people sometimes talk about, I'm alone, I feel guilty, I feel um, depressed, I'm sad. See what they're losing, or if they felt like they've lost love or God or friendship, not to mention financial security. So like all these things work together. I hope I'm not depressing you, because I'm giving you a perspective on how stress affects people, so that we can learn to use the techniques we talked about earlier. What are the new thoughts we want to have? We've got to override the the negative functioning of our brains and bodies. We've got to override it to the point where we put in new thoughts and feelings. And so, again, we said not everybody responds the same. About a third of the people have little or mild reaction to trauma, a third have moderate, and a third have severe. And there's no way of knowing which person is going to have what, other than maybe their history or their mental health vulnerabilities. But on the whole, that's how it breaks down. And it's we can't judge people based on it, but understand that in a given population, if there are 1,000 people that you work with and are responsible for and have to write to, know that a third of them are going to be having a severe reaction and a third of them will be kind of minimally reactive. So just know that, because that's just the way human beings operate. So usually, we talked about this. The critical events, sudden, they're often unexpected. Again, they disrupt our control. They often involve a loss, life damaging. Usually it's big. And what we're talking about now with this COVID-19 is big. When I was in the maybe I had a mild case because I didn't have to go to the hospital, or I couldn't get tested. I think I told you that, and so I can't say for sure. But when I was at a point where it seemed like most of my systems were failing, and I was feverish and delusional, and I wondered. I thought about, I actually wrote an addendum to my my will for my wife, just to make sure that things don't get caught up, and which you know, we were never good at that anyway, I'll admit it. So I wanted to make sure. But that feeling, that loss of control that took place in my life, and the way I felt about, being sick at that moment, was changed a lot of things at the moment. And it was very hard for me to get hold of the anxiety that caused. And so I've been practicing back to my relaxation, my thoughts, and my feelings to reduce the toxicity of the stress that I've experienced, let's say, over the last 2-3 weeks. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. Let's see. Um, we started to talk about the importance of it affecting the workforce. So your communication strategies need to be very credible. Um, you need to be reliable, empathic. Um, Empathy wins out over everything. And if you remember, the studies Gallup over the years, and talk about opinion polls. The number one management strategy has always been that employees seem to do well when they believe and feel that management cares about them. It's, no matter which way you turn or how you look at numbers, the belief that a person cares about how you feel, that they care about your thoughts and your feelings are more important than anything else in terms of whether people are satisfied at their job, whether they'll stay at the job, whether they'll put up with other stuff, as long as they believe that their immediate supervisor cares about their well-being and cares about the way they feel. So if you're writing stuff, if you're putting together communication plans and strategies, I hope that you will convey as often as you can to the people around you that you care about the way they think and feel, and you care about them personally. And the reason that this is important is it seems to get through what we call the rust, we call it the stress that gets in the way. It seems to get through and reaches people, and they will tell you later on. They'll say, I remember the conversation we had back in February." They'll say, or back in March when we talked, and you really, you cared about me. And knowing that people will remember that and they will respond to that makes it incumbent upon you to just to make sure you let them know that you know how they feel. Okay? So let's take the next phase. Now, the reason that we have to be very clear, the reason we've got to do that is because when people are stressed, we talked about the stress response. Look at these distortions that take place because of the adrenaline, the psychological arousal, the focus on action. People's perceptions are distorted. They don't hear very well. If you look at the blue box on the bottom, when people are in a stress response, time slows down for them. They actually experience slow motion. Almost 70% of the population during peaks of stress, of severe stress. Sound diminishes. Tunnel vision, actually, what they see decreases as much as, well, visual distortion, if you look at the top of the blue box, is 83%, and tunnel vision becomes 60%, 7% of that 83%. So it's tunnel vision. So they're not even seeing well, they're not hearing well, and they're not moving well. So how we communicate has to be way overdone. So not only do we have to communicate in terms of how we feel and how much we care about people, we've got to present information not just to our coworkers, but to our family and the people around us, as if that they're impaired, as if that there's something wrong with them. Because if they're stressed, something is wrong with them. They may have tunnel vision. They may need more clarity than you think. So we have to be patient and understanding, as well as clear, patient, and understanding. I guess those would be the three most important things. How anxiety, affects the perceptual field. Just look at this. I mean, the perceptual field drops tremendously toward panic. So people perceive much less. And so think of where you're at right now on this, maybe. Just take a sec. I know I've been, talking on and on, but think about where you are on this. Are you at panic? Sometimes maybe. Sometimes maybe. I have a neighbor on my street, and it's a very quiet place. I live in a peninsula in Cape Cod. You can't get more quieter than that. But one of my neighbors had a big sign on her lawn. When I say big sign, I mean like kind of a political sign. It maybe like 12 feet by 5 feet, and the sign said, "Please wear a mask." And I realized that her husband is fighting cancer right now, and going through chemo, and so she has a sign on her lawn so that people walking by um, won't cause a problem for her husband's condition. And when you think that big signs are being put on her lawn, how much panic she is probably feeling, and how much panic her husband may be feeling, that even a passerby could cause this kind of reaction and panic. So look at how perceptual feel. She's in panic right now, and what she is seeing right now from people is, it must be very troubling for her, and makes me think I'm afraid to go knock on her door now, because I don't want to get close to her house. But I guess I can't throw anything at her house either because that would be worse. But I'll find a way to reach out to her and see if I can do something. So we've been through this. They just given time. I want to leave time for questions, and I know that I haven't left very much time, so I'm going to go through this because you can look at that slide later, and it's the impact of shock. I'm not leaving much time. Lose control, overwhelmed, anxious, afraid. That's kind of the state. That's what we're looking at. Talked about that, unfortunately, and we should be getting toward the end. But I promise you that with good stress management techniques, critical reactions will improve, especially if you identify your feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, and if you not only identify them, but apply them, write them down. How do you want to think? How do you want to feel? How do you want to behave? What does acceptance mean? Where do you want to be? Exaggerate it. Say that it's true. And I'm telling you this for the third time or fourth time because I know that you're stressed. And with stress, I don't want you to forget this. I want you to remember it. Okay, let's see. I think we're close to our we talked about that already in another way, how stress muffles sound and increases. I didn't talk about the last bullet though. The sense of urgency is heightened as a result. So everything feels urgent and more important when we're stressed, and we got to watch out for that because it goes against what we want to do. Goes against the gentle walk or the gardening or taking time to cook your favorite food or to be one with the universe or, be part of your spirituality. This heightened sense of urgency is a trap that comes with the adrenaline. And you got to be careful to not let urgency take over. Okay. I'm going to ask you on your own to take a look at these slides later on. Healing. In bullets here, we get limit media exposure. Very, very important. I'm trying to be respectful for your time. Reducing caffeine, critical. Deep abdominal breaths with nice exhalation. Stay in your routine. Stay involved. As I stay in your routine, you really can't do that, but your new routine. Exercise as much as you can. Mind breaks as much as you can. And there's, I think, one more. Read this on your own, this last slide. You'll have it. You can access it. Kelly said it'll be on the website, the UCS website. These are some questions you might ask yourself about, when it's time to get back to work, more of a work-related conversation, key things that you may want to think about that might help you plan toward the future. Here's a couple of resources that you might want to look at, and when you have some time, if you need them, get some more information. And finally, always happy to answer your questions. That's my website, my email address. If you'd like, email me anytime you want. I'd love to talk with you. Let me know you were on the call. Open to have any questions. I know that it's 2 minutes to the hour, and feel free if you have questions. I guess if you write them down, I'll see them. And if I don't see them, I'll assume that you've got what you need for now. I see some nice comments, so thank you for those of you who said something nice. If you have some recommendations for ways of improving this or ideas for making it more effective for you, let me know. But I think we're done here. And Kelly, unless you have something you want to add or goodbye to the audience, I appreciate your listening, and I wish you all the best and safety and health and what you need. Thank you very much. And